My name is Evelyn Hart. I'm 37, and the moment I saw her stumble into the garden, mascara streaked down her cheekbones, champagne glass still clutched like a lifeline. My chest didn't rise. It stayed still, silent, measured. I took a sip of my own drink and smiled from behind the rim. A gentle, practiced smile. The kind I've worn for years. The kind women like me wear when we're about to serve a dish best eaten cold. Before I tell what I did to there, tell me where you're watching from in the comments and don't forget to hit subscribe. Let's get back. Behind her, guests pretended not to watch, not to whisper. Her heels clicked unevenly across the stone patio, like the tail end of a song that's lost its rhythm. She didn't look at me right away. She didn't need to. She could feel me. Her eyes, once so smug, were now glassy and frantic, darting toward the fire pit where the music had died and the silence had grown heavy. And I didn't move. I stayed seated on the velvet settee, legs crossed, neckline graceful, nails still drying under the sun. My gaze followed her, not in cruelty, but in quiet calculation. 12 years. That's how long it's been since she grinned at me while my mother-in-law poured red wine down the front of my wedding dress and called it clumsy nerves. This wasn't a party. Not for her. It was a reckoning. And I had planned every detail. Let me take you back. 12 years ago, I thought I was marrying into family. The kind that welcomed you, made you feel safe, celebrated your wins. I met Harrison when I was just 25. A real estate consultant with champagne charm and ambition that stretched like Manhattan skyline. He was dazzling. So were his parents. At least, that's what it looked like on the outside. His mother, Vivian, had eyes that never smiled. Sharp, cool, always watching. And his sister, Clara. She was the kind of woman who seemed to breathe judgment. Nothing I wore was ever right. No restaurant ever fancy enough. No joke I made ever quite landed. But I was naive. Or maybe I just wanted so badly to be loved that I ignored the scent of rot beneath the roses. The day of our wedding was supposed to be perfect, until it wasn't. I remember the exact moment. The flash of red. The gasp. The silence. 1 hour before the ceremony, I walked into the bridal suite to find my dress drenched in Cabernet Sauvignon. Not splashed. Not stained. Drenched. From the neckline to the hem. My hands trembled as I touched the soaked lace, my heart pounding like a trapped animal. I couldn't even speak. Vivian was standing by the open bottle, napkin in hand, lips curled into something between amusement and pity. "I told you not to put white wine next to red," she said coolly. "You were warned." Behind her, Clara laughed. Actually laughed. She lifted her phone and snapped a photo of the wreckage like it was some sick joke. "Maybe next time you'll pick a dress that hides your flaws better." No one helped. Not the planner, not the makeup artist, not even Harrison, who walked in later, looked at the mess, then looked at me and said, "It's just a dress, Eve. Don't make a scene." Don't make a scene. That line would repeat in my head for years. We got married anyway. I wore my mother's vintage gown. I smiled through every photo, every toast, every fake embrace from a family that had already decided I didn't belong. I played the perfect bride because I thought love was about endurance, about swallowing your pain so someone else didn't feel uncomfortable. I didn't know then that the people who ask you to shrink are the ones most afraid of your light. But deep down, I knew something had cracked. Not just in my trust, but in my spine. And cracks, when ignored, eventually split. The years that followed were quiet at first, predictable. Harrison worked late. Clara got married. Vivian invited herself over too often. I smiled. I baked. I hosted. I withered. Then, one night, 7 years into our marriage, I found the email. A reply from Clara to Harrison, laced with flirtation. Signed, "Yours, always." At first, I thought it was a joke, a cruel nickname. A family joke I hadn't been in on. But it wasn't. What followed was the unraveling of everything. Not because he cheated, though he did, but because he chose her. Always her. And in the quiet aftermath of our divorce, when everyone assumed I would move far away or disappear into bitterness, I did something else. I started again. Built again. Not for survival, but for vengeance. Beautiful, patient, elegant vengeance. So when Clara's marriage began to fall apart, when the cracks she mocked in me appeared in her life, I did what no one expected. I threw her a party. A lavish, wine-soaked, open-bar divorce celebration under the stars, with a velvet guest list, and one seat that stayed intentionally empty. Mine. Until now. She's walking toward it. Toward me. 12 years of silence between us. And she's about to sit down. Because she doesn't know what I've prepared. She doesn't know who else I've invited. But she's about to find out. 12 years ago, my world looked different. Simpler. Softer. Maybe even foolish. I was living in a one-bedroom apartment above a flower shop on Greenfield Avenue. The kind with crooked wooden floors, a leaky radiator, and sun-washed curtains that danced in the breeze. I made coffee with a French press. I had 3 plants and named them all after Jane Austen characters. I believed love was a solution. That if 2 people cared enough, they could fix anything. Harrison was the kind of man who walked into a room like he owned the air. Sharp cheekbones, expensive shoes, and an ambition that smelled like cologne and closing deals. He told me once, on our second date, that he planned to be a millionaire by 35. He was 29 at the time. I laughed. I shouldn't have. He pursued me like I was a promotion, and I mistook that for devotion. In the beginning, it felt like a dream. Late-night dinners in candle-lit corners, weekends in wine country, the kind of dates that made other women raise their eyebrows with envy. He listened, or at least he knew how to. He remembered my favorite kind of tea, the story behind my middle name, how I liked my eggs poached, but even in the early light, there were shadows. I remember the first time I met his mother, Vivian. It was at a charity gala downtown. I wore a silk emerald dress and heels that hurt too much. Harrison introduced me as his artist girlfriend, which wasn't quite true. I was a freelance interior designer at the time, but I smiled anyway. Vivian extended her hand like a queen accepting tribute. "An artist," she said, eyes flicking over my outfit. "Well, everyone has their passions." She smiled, but it never touched her eyes. That would become her signature, expressions that performed without emotion. Then there was Clara. You could feel her before she entered a room. She wasn't loud. No, Clara didn't need volume. She had presence, her hair always freshly blown out, her tone always lightly sarcastic, like life was a stage and she was just humoring everyone. She worked in fashion PR, which meant she had opinions. About everything. My nail color, my shoes, even the font on my business cards. Helvetica? "Sweetie, are you trying to look like a dental office?" She said it with a laugh. Always a laugh. The kind that wraps itself in humor so you can't call it cruel without sounding sensitive. And I was sensitive. Too sensitive, they'd later say. I took things too personally. But looking back, I realize it was never about sensitivity. It was about being gaslit until I questioned my own reflection. Still, I pressed on. Because Harrison made me feel seen. Or maybe I was just hungry to be chosen. I told myself the tension would fade. That once we were married, Vivian would soften, Clara would back off, and I'd become a part of something larger than myself. A family. A legacy. We moved in together after 6 months. A condo with floor-to-ceiling windows and cold marble countertops that looked beautiful but echoed when you spoke. I turned it into a home. Candles, textures, art. He let me. As long as nothing got in the way of his clean lines and minimalist aesthetic. And when he proposed, on a rooftop in Venice, no less, it felt like a fairy tale. He slipped the ring on my finger before I could even say yes, as if he already knew I would. Maybe that was the first assumption I should have questioned. The wedding planning began quickly, or rather, it was handed over. Vivian insisted on overseeing it. "I have taste, Evelyn. You have charm," she told me in her kitchen one afternoon, while I flipped through bridal magazines. Charm, like a puppy, like something you pat and distract. Clara offered to help too, but her version of help came with backhanded suggestions and just saying comments. "Maybe don't go strapless," she said. "With your shoulders, it's just not the most flattering. Are you sure you want roses? They're kind of basic. White. I mean, it's your choice, but maybe off-white would be more realistic." I laughed back then. Nervous, appeasing laughter. I thought keeping peace meant keeping love. I was also working on my dream project at the time, a boutique redesign for a local book cafe. It was cozy, elegant, and exactly the kind of work I wanted to be known for, spaces that made people feel something. I poured myself into it, designing shelves that curved like waves, selecting lighting that glowed like candlelight. But Harrison hated how much time I spent on it. "It's not scalable," he said one night over dinner. "I don't get why you're wasting so much energy on something that doesn't have growth potential." I remember looking down at my pasta, appetite gone. That was the moment I first felt the pinch. That silent tug inside your chest that whispers, "He's not listening, he's correcting." The closer the wedding got, the more I shrank. I didn't realize it then. I thought I was adapting, maturing, being a team player. But in reality, I was twisting myself into something smaller, softer, more palatable. The bridal shower was held at the country club where Harrison's parents were lifetime members. I wore a pale blue dress. Vivian gave me a cookbook. Clara gave me a silk robe embroidered with wife material, in pink thread. "Don't take it personally," she said when she saw my face. "It's a joke." But jokes have roots, and some jokes grow fangs. Looking back, my biggest assumption was this: that love required endurance, that suffering was just part of the package, that if you're lucky enough to be chosen, you fight to stay chosen, even when they've already left the room. I assumed loyalty would earn loyalty. Kindness would soften cruelty, patience would be rewarded, but none of that saved me. Because some people don't break you with violence, they break you with indifference. And so, I entered marriage with hope and high heels, a soft heart, and a stiff smile. I walked into that wedding day believing I was about to be woven into a family. Instead, I was stitched into a game I didn't even know I was playing. And on the morning of my wedding, when the dress lay ruined and laughter echoed behind me, I still went through with it. Because back then, I didn't know the power of walking away, not yet. It didn't start with a dramatic reveal. It started with silence. 7 years into our marriage, the home I had so carefully curated began to hum with something I couldn't name. It wasn't noise, it was the absence of it. The way Harrison stopped asking how my day was. The way his phone no longer stayed face up. The way dinners turned into quiet chewing beneath the glow of pendant lights we picked out together. Or, rather, that I picked and he approved without looking. At first, I told myself we were just busy, that all long-term couples go through this, that marriage has seasons. But there was a night, a particular Thursday in May, when something shifted. He came home late. He didn't kiss me, didn't take off his shoes, just walked straight past me and said, "Don't wait up next time." His voice was low, flat, like a line rehearsed too many times. That was when the tremor hit. Subtle, internal, like glass cracking beneath your feet, not quite loud enough to call for help. I stood there in the doorway, barefoot in silk pajamas, wondering if I'd imagined it, wondering if it was my fault. That was my default response by then. What did I do wrong? I didn't find the email until 2 weeks later. I wasn't snooping. I wasn't that kind of wife. I was looking for our travel confirmation for his company retreat, an event I'd been looking forward to, mostly because it meant we'd be alone in a villa with no family, no phones, no silence. But instead of the folder marked travel, I opened one labeled MISC, and inside it was Clara's name. The subject line was harmless, FYI, but the content? Anything but. Her message was short, familiar, laced with innuendo. Last night was risky. You owe me a real one next time. I don't share well. Yours, always. I blinked, and blinked again. My hands went cold. I clicked on the thread. There were dozens of them, some months old, some as recent as last night. The world didn't stop. That's the thing about betrayal. It doesn't come with sirens or fanfare. The walls don't cave in. Your heart doesn't shatter like glass. No. It rots from the inside, quietly, slowly, like fruit bruising beneath the skin. I didn't scream. I didn't confront him. Not at first. Instead, I closed the laptop, made dinner, poured wine, and set the table like nothing happened. That night, I watched him eat roasted chicken while my hands shook under the table. He talked about a new investor. I nodded. He kissed my cheek before bed. I let him. Because I didn't know who I was anymore. Wife, fool, spectator. I stared at the ceiling for hours that night, thinking, how long has this been happening? Was I always the joke? The next day, I went to Clara's, not to scream, not to accuse. I just needed to see her. She answered the door in loungewear and highlighter under her brows. Her nails were the same color as mine. I noticed that. It felt intentional. Eve, she smiled. Wow, what a surprise. I looked at her, really looked at her. This woman I had tried so hard to win over, to impress, to befriend. I thought of the robe she gave me at the bridal shower. I thought of the wine on my dress. I thought of all the times she laughed and I laughed with her, thinking we were building something real. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. What could I even say? Instead, I said, just wanted to drop off a bottle of wine. Harrison mentioned you liked this one. I handed her the bottle and walked away. I don't even remember driving home. I lost time after that. I stopped going to work. Clients texted. I didn't answer. I stopped wearing makeup. Didn't brush my hair. My body functioned, but my mind was waterlogged. One afternoon, I stood in the grocery store frozen in front of a shelf of tomatoes, holding a jar of pesto and crying quietly, because it reminded me of the first meal I cooked for Harrison in that tiny apartment above the flower shop. I forgot who I used to be. I stopped decorating. I stopped playing music in the house. I just moved through rooms like a ghost of a woman who once believed in vows and velvet evenings and forever. My identity wasn't just hurt. It had been erased. Eventually, I did confront him. It wasn't fireworks. No screaming. Just a quiet morning over coffee. I placed the laptop on the kitchen counter and pulled up the email. He looked at it, then looked at me. And he didn't flinch. I knew you'd find out eventually, he said. That was it. No apology. No regret. Just inevitability. He poured his coffee and walked away like we'd just discussed the weather. That was the moment I broke. Not because of the affair, but because of the indifference. Because I realized I wasn't even worth the performance of guilt. That night, I packed a single bag and left. I didn't have a plan. I just drove until the gas light blinked and checked into a roadside inn with peeling wallpaper and a broken lamp. I laid on the mattress fully clothed and cried so hard I bruised my ribs. Grief does that sometimes. It makes a home in your bones. And still, part of me hated myself for crying. You stayed. You let them treat you like this. You let them laugh. The shame was venomous. But buried beneath it, something else was growing. A flicker. A seed. Not rage. Not yet. But clarity. I spent weeks in that in-between state, not married, not single, not broken, not whole. People called. I ignored them. Harrison didn't bother. Clara sent me a single text. I hope we can talk when you're ready. I blocked her. There was nothing left to say. But slowly, in the quiet, I began to rebuild. Not externally, not yet. Internally. I wrote letters I never sent. I walked for hours in the park. I painted things I didn't show anyone. I sat with the version of myself I had abandoned long ago, the one who lived above the flower shop and believed she was enough without being chosen. And one day, sitting in a sun-drenched cafe with chipped mugs and scratched tables, I wrote one sentence in my notebook. They laughed at the ashes, but I'll make fire from them. And that was the beginning of the woman I am now. The one Clara would one day walk toward, mascara running. The one who smiled with power behind her silence. The one who remembered every laugh, every stain, every lie. Because revenge isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's elegantly planned and patiently served. There's a kind of silence that doesn't comfort. It haunts. It clings to your skin like smoke. That's the silence I lived in after leaving Harrison. I moved into a sublet in a forgotten corner of the city. It was the kind of apartment that came furnished with someone else's regrets. Scuffed walls, a fridge that hummed like it was complaining, a view of a dumpster and a dying tree. But it was mine. And I didn't have to see the dining table where Clara once sat, or the kitchen island where Harrison kissed my shoulder while texting her under the counter. At first, I thought the hard part was over. I'd left. I'd confronted the truth. That was supposed to be the climax, right? It wasn't. Because what came after the storm wasn't calm. It was the drowning. I started drinking at odd hours, a glass of wine at noon, a cocktail at 4, just enough to blur the sharp edges of thought. I stopped returning messages from my few remaining friends. I ignored my mother's voicemails, the ones that came once a week, where she asked how I was but never waited for an answer. I told myself I needed space, that isolation was healing. But really, I just didn't want anyone to see what I'd become. Some nights, I walked until my legs gave out. Other nights, I lay on the cold kitchen floor, staring at the ceiling like it might give me instructions. The worst part wasn't the loneliness. It was the shame of still missing him. Even after everything, I still craved the version of Harrison I thought was real. The man who brought me tea when I had a cold. The man who once told me I lit up a room before I ever spoke. I hated that I still loved a ghost. At one point, I tried dating again. It was a disaster. I met a man named Marcus at a bookstore. He complimented the ring on my right hand. Ironically, my old engagement ring, which I had flipped after the divorce like a bitter trophy. He was kind, warm, a math teacher. He asked thoughtful questions. Told me I had eyes like a woman who's loved too hard. I let myself believe it could be something. That maybe, just maybe, I wasn't broken. We dated for a few weeks. And then, one night, he brought me to a dinner party. Guess who was there? Clara, with her new fiancé. Laughing, glowing, telling a story I recognized as mine, but twisted. And she left in the middle of the night without saying goodbye, she said, eyes glittering across the room. She was always dramatic like that. I froze, my fork mid-air. Marcus noticed the change in me. I smiled too wide, excused myself to the bathroom and stayed there for 20 minutes, staring into a mirror that didn't recognize me. The next morning, I ghosted him. I wasn't ready. Or maybe I didn't believe I ever would be. Rock bottom came one Tuesday in February, the day I was fired. Not because I wasn't talented, I was, but because I stopped showing up. My longest client, the one who gave me my first real design break, called me in. She didn't yell. She didn't shame me. She simply said, "Evelyn, I know you're hurting, but we all have to choose whether we live in it or grow through it." And that line, it broke something open. I walked home that day in the freezing rain without an umbrella, my shoes soaked, my hair matted. And I realized I had built my entire life around being chosen. By a man, by a family, by clients, by friends, but I had never chosen myself. That night, I booked a therapy session, not because I believed it would work, but because I had nothing left to lose. Her name was Dr. Lillian Verma. She wore chunky earrings and no makeup, and spoke like someone who'd lived 3 lifetimes. Our first session, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I sat on her leather couch and said nothing for 5 full minutes. She didn't interrupt. She didn't fill the space. She just looked at me and said, "You've been holding your breath for 7 years. You can exhale now." And I did. For the first time, I breathed. Therapy wasn't linear. Some days I left feeling raw and radiant. Other days, I left feeling like I had unstitched every thread and couldn't find the needle. We talked about patterns, about why I tolerated cruelty wrapped in silk, about the girl who thought love was earned through silence. We unpacked childhood, expectations, the wounds I'd glamorized into resilience, and then came the hardest session, the one where she said, "If you want to become who you're meant to be, Evelyn, you have to let the old version die." "What does that mean?" I asked, already fearing the answer. "It means giving up your dream of being accepted by people who only love the version of you they could control." It hit me hard, because despite everything, a part of me still craved their approval. Vivian, Clara, even Harrison. I still wanted to show them I became someone, that they were wrong. But healing isn't about proving them wrong. It's about proving yourself right. So I made the hardest decision I've ever made. I wrote a letter to my mother, the only person in my family I still spoke to, and I told her, "Please don't ask me to come home for holidays if they'll be there. I'm done pretending." It broke her heart, and it shattered mine. But it was the first boundary I ever drew in permanent ink. And in that silence that followed, I found peace. Not joy yet, not purpose, but peace, like the clearing of smoke after a long burn. Months passed. I started working again, small jobs, intimate projects, designing reading nooks and meditation spaces, soft textures, light, clean air. I took a yoga class. I started running, not to lose weight, but to feel my legs again, to remind myself I was alive. I began building something new, not a home, not a marriage, not a life anyone else could decorate, but a foundation, one choice at a time. And that's when the call came. From an old acquaintance, a woman I'd met at a wedding years ago. She was getting divorced, needed a space to host something symbolic, a closure ceremony. Not a pity party, she said, something fierce. She wanted me to design it, and I did. Candles, black roses, moonstone accents, strength, stillness, light. That event became a rumor, then a niche, then a service. I began curating divorce celebrations, not in mockery but in metamorphosis. It became my signature. And that's when the email came. From Clara, 12 years after the wine, the laughter, the betrayal. "I heard you do divorce parties now. Ironic, huh? Anyway, I could use one. Things fell apart. Let me know your rate." And that was the moment I knew the woman who once cried on the kitchen floor was gone. Because I didn't feel rage or sadness or revenge. I felt ready, not to hurt, but to design her ending the way she designed my beginning. Healing doesn't arrive in a single moment. It doesn't knock. It whispers, softly, gently, until one day, you realize your silence is no longer emptiness. It's peace. That's what the mornings became for me. No longer spent under heavy blankets hiding from the world, but wrapped in sunlight. I started waking up with purpose again, stretching, breathing, making my coffee slowly, the way I used to before I knew what betrayal tasted like. My home, this small but sacred space I curated with intention, began to reflect who I was becoming. Light fabrics, open windows, nothing fake, everything earned. I used to believe strength was about holding on, but I was learning. Real strength is the grace to let go. My business didn't explode overnight. It bloomed, quietly, organically, authentically. Word spread fast. Women whispered my name in yoga studios, divorce attorney offices, in salon chairs with foils in their hair. Evelyn Hart, the woman who doesn't just design events, she curates healing, reinvention, closure with elegance. Each client brought a piece of themselves. I didn't just create parties, I created spaces for transformation. There was Lena, who toasted herself after leaving a 20-year marriage to a man who never remembered her birthday. There was Priya, who stood barefoot in a silk robe and read a letter to her past self beneath a moonlit canopy. And then there was Maya, who brought her daughters, lit sparklers, and told them, "This is what freedom looks like." Every celebration became a ceremony, not revenge, not ego, just reclamation. I designed myself the same way, not to impress anyone, but to feel me again. I started wearing colors I used to avoid: deep crimsons, earthy greens, unapologetic black. I changed my walk, taller, slower. I cut my hair one October afternoon and didn't cry in the salon chair. I just watched as pieces of the old me fell away in soft spirals to the floor. And when I looked up, the woman in the mirror smiled, not because she was finished, but because she'd finally started. I also met someone, unexpectedly, quietly, without effort or performance. His name was Gabriel. He was a photographer. And the first thing he said to me wasn't, "You're beautiful." It was, "You look like someone who's been through fire and chose not to become it." He didn't chase, didn't crowd. He showed up with softness, with curiosity. He asked questions no one else had asked. Not "what happened to you," but "what did you learn from it?" We weren't explosive. We were warm. Not a wildfire. A hearth. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to shrink or exaggerate. I could be quiet and still be seen. I could laugh without apology. I could cry without shame. There was no label, no rush, just a mutual agreement. Let's heal beside each other. And yet, despite all the progress, all the growth, there was one unopened door, one echo that still whispered at night. Clara. I hadn't responded to her email, not because I was angry, but because I wasn't ready. I had spent years crawling out of the pit she helped dig. Why would I go back? And still, there was a part of me that knew the story wasn't finished, because healing isn't always about moving on. Sometimes, it's about circling back with clarity, with power, with choice. Then, one morning, I received another message. This time, from her assistant. "Hi, Evelyn. Clara asked if we could secure your availability for mid-July. She's going through a high-profile split and would prefer a discreet, elegant event to mark her new chapter. Your discretion and artistry come highly recommended." Discreet, elegant, a new chapter. I stared at the email for a long time. Not out of anger, but out of fascination. The symmetry of it all. 12 years ago, I stood in white lace, red wine spilling down my chest, laughter echoing around me. Now she stood in her own ruins, whispering for help through a third party. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt still, like the moment before a symphony begins, like the last inhale before a performance. I replied 2 days later. Short, simple. "Let's talk. Send me the details." The meeting was set. Neutral location, high-rise terrace cafe, mid-afternoon. I arrived early, dressed with intention. Charcoal gray silk blouse, pressed trousers, and the same necklace I wore the day I moved out. Not to provoke, just to remind myself of the distance I'd traveled. I watched her arrive. Clara. Still polished, still styled, but different. There was a flicker behind her eyes now. Not just exhaustion, humility. She sat across from me, took off her sunglasses, and for the first time, she didn't lead with sarcasm. "I didn't think you'd come," she said softly. I just looked at her, let the silence stretch, because I didn't owe her comfort anymore. She exhaled. And then, quietly, "I didn't just ruin your wedding. I ruined your life. And I know it. And that's where I'll leave you, because the confrontation deserves its own stage. And she's about to walk into the reckoning she never saw coming." The wind on the rooftop terrace was soft, just enough to rustle linen napkins and lift loose strands of hair. Below, the city shimmered in early evening light, glass and steel glowing gold. It should have been a peaceful setting. But the table between us crackled with a history only we understood. Clara sat across from me, legs crossed, fingers wrapped around a champagne flute she hadn't sipped from. Her posture was practiced, poised, but her eyes kept scanning the horizon like she was looking for a script that had blown away in the wind. I didn't rush her. I didn't save her. That was part of her reckoning now, sitting in the discomfort she'd taught so well. "I appreciate you coming," she said, finally. Her voice was lower now, not hushed, humbled. I said nothing. Silence is a language when you master it. She cleared her throat. I didn't reach out to stir anything up. I wanted this to be clean, quiet, the divorce. I'm not doing well with it." I looked at her, but not in pity, just observation. The way a historian might study the ruins of a place that once held power. She continued, "I know we never really talked about what happened. I've gone over it a million times in my head. What I did, what I said, what I let happen." I didn't flinch. She leaned in slightly. "I was jealous of you, Evelyn. I was. You walked into our family and suddenly he wasn't just my brother anymore. My parents adored you, even if they didn't show it. You had this softness, this realness. It made me feel fake." She laughed, but it was thin and brittle, a cracked glass pretending to hold water. "I don't expect forgiveness," she added quickly. "I'm not even sure I deserve your time. I need someone to help me mark this ending. You're the best. You always were." I raised one brow. There it was, the slipping of the mask, the admission she never gave when it mattered. You always were. She kept talking, about her marriage, about how it fell apart, how she discovered her husband had been cheating for 2 years with her assistant, how betrayal, when it finally found her, didn't feel dramatic. It felt surgical, clean and cold. She looked at me then, and something shifted. Her eyes widened slightly. She was seeing me, not the version she remembered, too eager, too quiet, too soft, but the woman I had become. My shoulders didn't curve inward anymore. My jaw didn't tighten to hold back words. I wasn't waiting to be chosen. I was simply there, present, unshakable. She leaned back and swallowed. "You're different now." I tilted my head, a soft acknowledgement. "I had time to grow." She hesitated. "I think about your wedding a lot. About the dress, the wine. That day," I laughed. "I remember laughing and thinking it was funny, that you looked weak, but you didn't." She paused. I did. There it was, her reflection. For the first time, she saw that it was never me who looked small. It was her hunger, her cruelty, her fear. I let the silence stretch again, not to punish her, but to let her feel the echo of it. She tried again. So, can we work together? For this party? Can we put the past aside? I looked down at the table. The linen was ivory, almost white, the same shade of the ruined dress I never wore. And then I looked up, slowly, met her eyes, let her sit in the weight of her own question, and with the calm of someone who no longer needed revenge, with the softness of someone who knew her own power, I said one line, "You don't get to hire the woman you buried." It landed like thunder. Not loud, but undeniable. She blinked. Once, twice. Like the room had tilted beneath her. Her lips parted, but no sound came. There were no comebacks, no clever retorts, just silence. Thick, full. I stood, gathered my bag, tucked my chair in, smoothed the front of my blouse with a grace she could never mimic. She was still frozen in her seat. I stepped around the table and paused behind her, just long enough for her to feel the full circle of it all. Then, quietly, I whispered, "Next time you pour the wine, make sure it's not on yourself." And with that, I walked away. No glance back, no ache in my chest, just peace. The kind that comes when you've not only survived your story, but rewritten the ending. I didn't cry after that meeting. Not in the elevator, not in the car. Not when I walked through my front door and kicked off my heels in the hallway. I just stood there for a moment, keys in hand, listening to the sound of my breath. It was steady, like the sea after a storm. I didn't realize how light I had become until that moment. How long I'd been carrying things I never had to. Their shame, their silence, their expectations, all draped across my shoulders like a coat I didn't notice until I took it off. And when I finally exhaled, really exhaled, I felt something I hadn't in years. Free. The next morning, I lit a candle in the kitchen. It wasn't for any reason other than the fact that it smelled like cedar and clean sheets, and I'd promised myself that peace didn't need an occasion. I sat at the counter with my notebook, the same one I'd scribbled in when I first left Harrison, when I didn't know what came next, when I was all cracked open and messy and scared. Now, the pages held stories, moments, truths. I flipped to the back and started a new one. Not a letter to them, not to Clara, not to Harrison, but to the version of me that waited in the quiet, the one who stayed silent when her dress was ruined, the one who nodded through a marriage full of cold nights and colder hearts, the one who smiled through humiliation, hoping kindness could cure cruelty. She deserved to be seen. And so I wrote, "You did not imagine it. You did not deserve it. You were not weak for hoping. You were human." And that's enough. Spring came early that year. The tree outside my window bloomed in pale pinks and soft whites, and the air smelled of something new. I opened the windows more, let the breeze dance through the curtains, stopped rushing through my mornings, started drinking my coffee on the balcony instead of at my desk. One Saturday, I planted basil in little clay pots and hung them from the kitchen window. Not because I needed fresh herbs, but because I could. That's what healing became for me, not grand declarations or dramatic endings. Just the return to myself. The ability to choose joy without apology. I saw Gabriel again, and again after that. We didn't make plans. We just found each other in bookstores and galleries and coffee shops, like the city had decided we should cross paths until we figured out we belonged there. He never asked me about Harrison, or Clara, or the party I never threw. He asked about my favorite childhood movie, about the scent that made me feel safe, about the first thing I ever designed just for myself. We sat by the water one evening, bare feet in the sand, and he looked at me like I was something worth watching, not for spectacle, but for softness. And I told him something I hadn't told anyone. I'm not afraid of starting over anymore. He smiled. That's the beginning, not the end. One night, I walked through my apartment and turned off the lights one by one. Kitchen, hallway, living room. I paused at my bedroom door. It was simple, Clean, white sheets, warm lighting. A small framed photo of me, just me, on a solo trip to Lisbon. Smiling, holding a gelato, the wind tangled in my hair. I had taken that picture 2 years after the divorce. Back when I didn't recognize her yet. Now I did. She wasn't a stranger anymore. She was me. There were still bad days, nostalgic mornings, quiet anniversaries of pain I didn't talk about out loud. But even those moments didn't sting the way they used to. They passed through me like wind. Acknowledged, accepted, released. Because healing isn't about pretending the fire never happened. It's about learning how to live in the house you rebuilt with your own hands. Clara never wrote back. Not after I declined the job. Not after I walked away. She didn't need to. Her silence was its own ending. Vivian sent a card once. Months later, white envelope, no return address, just a single sentence written in slanted ink. You've become someone. I didn't keep it, not out of bitterness, but because I didn't need it anymore. I didn't need their validation. I had mine. Sometimes, when I host events now, women walk up to me in tears. They don't know my story, but they say things like, "You made this feel sacred," or, "I don't feel broken anymore," and I smile. Not because I saved them, but because I know what it means to save yourself. So no, I never got revenge. Not the way they tell it in stories. No grand takedown, no viral moment, no ruined reputation. But what I got was rarer, more difficult, more powerful. I got peace. I got freedom. I got me. And sometimes, the best revenge is simply becoming untouchable.